and I've just started this recording this session for later follow-up and reference, but welcome to everyone who's joined us. We've been running these web meetings for a while in a project called Open Data in Developing Countries. A number of you have been involved in that project, but this is the first time recently we've opened these up to a wider audience and wider participation as part of the Open Data Research Network. The Open Data Research Network is coordinated by the World Wide Web Foundation and is supported by Canada's International Development Research Centre. And it's done broadly three things to date. One is the funded research of the Open Data in Developing Countries project I mentioned. The second is running a regular newsletter to share updates on the latest open data research, both academic research and practice-focused research. And the third thing is to try and build a community and a space for people to share their own updates, questions, reflections, research findings, policy issues, and we run that through a LinkedIn group, all of which you can access through opendataresearch.org. To just mention those that work in the Open Data in Developing Countries project, you will see at opendataresearch.org a series of reports that have just been published. I've just got up here on screen some images of the covers of those we've published in the last few days and weeks, and you can access all of those. But one of the things we've done in this work is try to engage and connect research and policy. So in our conversations, the issue of the data revolution came up, seeing that there's a lot of talk about the idea of a post-2015 or a sustainable development goals data revolution. And we realized we wanted to explore that. So this meeting is a chance to hear from some speakers about work they're doing around these issues. And to have an open discussion connecting research, policy, and practice around the topic of a data revolution. So I've just put up there a few lines I pulled out of one of the documents on the background reading list we shared of what is a data revolution from the post-2015 high-level panel, talking about the fact that data are required to track, monitor, and implement goals. Sharing the idea that data empowers people, but recognizing that the quality and accessibility of data today aren't good enough, and calling for commitment to both collect and share data in better ways, bottom up and top down. So hopefully in this call we can explore some of these themes, exploring questions like what different visions of a data revolution exist, or what are the different elements that might form part of that. Looking at where open data fits within this landscape, looking at what the opportunities are over the coming year to shape the idea of a data revolution. We're having this web meeting while in New York. The UN will be discussing much of this over the next few days, and there's real chances to feed in ideas, learning, research into that process, and then to ask what role that research has to play. And we're going to do that by hearing, first of all, I hope, from three speakers, if we can get the technology to work for that, and then opening up to discussion. So we'll have 25 to 30 minutes of speaker input, and then the floor will be open to you to ask questions, share your own thoughts and reflections, and we'll start off with two respondents from the ODDC project. But you can use the chat window here in GoToMeeting to share your thoughts as the call is ongoing, and I'll try and collect together some of those comments. And I've muted everyone for the moment just while we're in the speaker section, but later on I'll ask you to take control of your own muting. So we're going to start off with a presentation from Liz Steele of Publish What You Fund. Publish What You Fund as an organization have campaigned and made immense progress on getting international aid flows and information shared and made public, and have been thinking a lot about the importance of increasing that in the Sustainable Development Goals process. So I will hand over to Liz now to share a bit more on that.
Thanks, Tim. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
That's great. And hello to everybody. Thanks for the intro and the opportunity to join the meeting today. As you mentioned before, here in Publish What You Fund, we've been engaging with this issue in the context of our Road to 2015 campaign. And we really want transparency and open data for sustainable development to feature as an integral component of the post-2015 agenda. So we do have a vested interest here. But for today's presentation, I'm aiming to cover 3 areas. First of all, to explore where this data revolution came from and highlight the different processes where this discussion is happening. To look at concepts around why we need open data for the post-2015 agenda. And different panels and processes are all proposing different things. And also to highlight some of the opportunities, challenges and lessons we've been learning from working on open data within the context of aid transparency and development effectiveness. So Tim, if we go to the second slide, I thought it would be helpful to look firstly at where this idea for a data revolution came from and at the different UN processes where it's being discussed rather than sort of beyond the rather narrow definition of the Sustainable Development Goals. So if we look at the first column, it all started with the UN High-Level Panel report to advise on the Global Development Framework beyond 2015. And the panel submitted its report containing recommendations to the Secretary-General in May 2013. And it mentions the need for a data revolution for sustainable development for the very first time. In terms of objectives here, we can see it's about improving the quality of statistics and empowering people to monitor progress through technology. And the panel recommends establishing a global partnership on development data that's multi-stakeholder to take this work forward. This has been subsequently picked up by the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts on Sustainable Development Financing. You can see that in the second column, which was mandated at Rio+20 to assess financing needs, consider effectiveness, consistency, and synergies of existing frameworks. And the committee also highlights the need for a data revolution, but focuses more on fostering strong, relevant, and comparable data as the basis for improved global governance and sustainable development. Specifically, the report looks at keeping track of sustainable development financing flows and working towards the harmonization and integration of monitoring and accounting frameworks for all financing sources and their interplay at the country level. So the committee finalized its report in early 2014 in August, and it will feed into the Financing for Development Summit, which will be happening in Addis Ababa in July 2015. And also into the UN Secretary General's report and the post-2015 goals negotiations. The most recent addition, and perhaps for us the most exciting to these discussions, is the new independent expert advisory group on the data revolution. And it was announced only a couple of weeks ago, I think. You can see that here in the third column. And yes, it's more experts. But they'll be advising the Secretary General on measures required to close the data gaps and strengthen national statistical capacities. And the group will also look at opportunities linked to innovation, technical progress, and new public and private data providers to support conventional statistical systems and strengthen accountability at global, regional, and national level. So they've been mandated to provide input to the UN SecGen's synthesis report on monitoring and accountability, and we expect that to come out in December this year. And this will also feed into the discussions on goals and financing for development. So really, I guess we think it's for this advisory group to bring all these different conversations on the data revolution together. And from initial discussions, it looks like the group will not be a kind of ad hoc group, but it will remain for the duration of 2015. And it's also very likely that stakeholders will be asked to provide inputs in the coming weeks. We don't really know the process yet, as Tim mentioned. There's some meetings going on in New York at the moment. But I think it could be really useful to flag this to the group, as people might like to think about their own input into this process. So if we go on to the third slide, I think what this shows is that there may not be that much clarity at the moment on what open data for sustainable development means within these post-2015 discussions. But we do think there's a massive opportunity to open up the conversation and talk about broader issues of access to information, open data, and accountability. For example, it's an opportunity for the development community to invest in a truly global baseline from which to measure achievements and to make timely, disaggregated data on progress available to all. And that means governments, donors, civil society organizations, and individual citizens can know when progress has been made, for whom in order to take action. And I think it's also an opportunity for crowdsourcing and big data to offer real-time information on, for example, disasters, epidemics, and conflicts, and enable a more effective and timely global response. So it's not necessarily about goals, but what makes for more effective and accountable development, and how experience on open data can contribute to those discussions. For example, by, as Tim mentioned, empowering citizens and groups to hold their governments to account and push for policy change. But as we all know, transparency and open data is not a silver bullet for accountability. Access to information doesn't necessarily guarantee transformative change. It must be part of an environment that enables people to assert and claim their rights, and where there's the political space for them to do that, backed by accountability and monitoring mechanisms. But I think to influence this agenda, we in the open data community need to get better at sharing our experience, identifying the gaps, so we can work collectively to share innovation, best practice, and impact. So in slide 4, I've outlined some thoughts from lessons learned from our involvement in the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which aims to make information about development spending easier to access, use, and understand. So we think there's a need for standards and harmonization to ensure that data can be compared and used, but also for joining up data sets among different international initiatives. For example, there's the Extractives Initiative, IARTI, Open Contracting, and for better linking data between international and country levels. Implementation of open data standards requires matching political will with technical capacity linked to monitoring and accountability mechanisms. And we think investing in good data systems and processes does pay off, but it does require prioritization, resourcing, and capacity building, both in terms of data collection and use. And of course, people and users need to be at the heart of the data revolution. So that means that open data needs to be paired with accessibility for different users with different needs. International organizations, governments, civil society organizations, academic institutions, the media, and ultimately citizens. And I think we need to do more work on understanding the barriers to this. Likewise, data supply doesn't automatically guarantee data use or behavioral or cultural change, and we need to get better at understanding the reasons behind this. And finally, I think there's been some discussions about governance structures for the data revolution, but it's still not clear who will be steering this data revolution. We want to see a broad multi-stakeholder alliance involving all users rather than a group of UN experts convening this. Thanks, Tim. That's all for me.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Liz. That's a fantastic overview of this very complicated process, but some of the real opportunities to engage. I think we're going to go straight through our presentations. I think we've got Cecilia on the phone, but we're going to go to Jason next to talk about the work that Civicus are doing on another dimension of this, in the idea of a data shift. Civicus being an alliance of civil society globally, trying to provide the civil society voice in many of these processes. So hopefully Jason's mic will be working, and I'll hand over to you, Jason.
Hello, Tim. Thank you, and thank you to Liz as well. As Tim mentioned, I'm from Civicus, which is the World Alliance for Citizen Participation. We have members in over 150 countries around the globe and focus primarily on promoting citizen voice and protecting civic space, particularly where it's being threatened. And today I have the pleasure to talk to you a little bit about the big development data shift, which I think feeds into a lot of what Liz was saying as well, and has quite a bit of similarities and synergies. Excuse me. But if we go to slide 2, the big development data shift is really looking at trying to find a shadow monitoring mechanism to hold governments and all stakeholders to account for the commitments that they make in the post-2015 development agenda. And as we know, open data, we look at open government data, which is very important to us, and certainly, you know, an important source of monitoring information about development and development goals. As well, we have big data, and it looks like my slide's a little bit off here, so please excuse that, but big data is not what we're interested in. So when we talk about big data, we are talking about information that is collected in real time, primarily by corporations. When you think of Google and tracking of all uses and everything that we search, again, this is an important source of information, but generally wholly owned by corporations. So what we are actually interested in is citizen-generated data as an additional mechanism to monitor these commitments and performance. And we look at certain examples of this. If we can move to the next slide. On this slide, we have some screenshots of citizen reporting of corruption around the world. And this is but one example and one of the goals that will likely come out of the post-2015 agenda. But good governance is very important. And as we probably all know, governments are typically willfully negligent in their reporting of corruption. So as you see, these examples here are from India, Morocco, and Egypt. And if we can move to the next slide, I'll provide another source of examples. And this is citizen reporting mechanisms on gender-based violence. Again, what we have seen in civil society is that official data, while important, does not often present the full picture of the experiences of people on the ground. So if we can move to the next slide. And then that brings us to the data shift. This journey for us began about 18 months ago when we started to see increased attention on influencing the goals in the post-2015 agenda, but also began to realize that there wasn't as much emphasis on how citizens can promote accountability. So the data shift came out of this this series of realizations for us, and ultimately what we are looking to do is make sure that the data revolution does not repeat some of the mistakes from the past. And by that I mean we need to ensure that data is not collected about citizens, that citizens are not just the subjects of data, but rather the collection of data is for citizens, and citizens inform that data as well. So when we say the data shift, what we are looking to do is shift the entire paradigm, and it is an ambitious multi-stakeholder initiative. What we're looking to do is leverage the potential of new technologies, for example, the ones that I showed you on gender-based violence and corruption, to feed into a platform where citizens are able to be both users and producers of data. And if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you, and I apologize about my lack of control on that. But in the data shift, we realize that there are 3 core areas that we need to address. The first of which, when we talk about citizen-generated data, is coverage. What we've seen is that all of these monitoring mechanisms that I showed you earlier are very contextual. They're developed on an ad hoc basis, and that is important. That's something that we want to empower and encourage. But as it stands now, they are few and far between. So a major effort for the data shift would be to build the capacity and the development of these online monitoring mechanisms as well. And then that would feed into the third, if we can move to the next slide, which is comparability. So by addressing coverage, we increase the scope of citizen-generated data. However, and as I mentioned earlier, many of these mechanisms are developed on an ad hoc basis. We need to be able to put into place some data harmonization structures that allow us to be able to compare those across sectoral, geographic, and thematic divides so that we can get a picture that is both locally relevant and globally significant, which would lead us to the third one, and the next slide. Ultimately, by addressing the coverage and the comparability, we want to be able to empower effective campaigning and advocacy tools for citizens to be able to hold their governments and stakeholders to account for these commitments that they've made. And in doing so, by addressing the 3 C's, we look to implement 5 core project streams. Now, excuse the very brief descriptions here because it's certainly much more complicated, but in the 5 project streams, we have the Global Knowledge Hub, which is a resource both online and information sharing between citizens that will allow for development of best practices and an opportunity for stakeholders to discuss what has worked and what failures that they've seen. As well, the thematic forums will be workshops that are designed to map coverage and support harmonization on particular thematic issues. Some of the many thematic issues that we are looking to focus on in the data shift would be corruption, gender-based violence, health, education, LGBTI rights, and the list could continue on and on, depending both on what comes out of the post-2015 agenda, as well as what citizens in national contexts identify as important priorities in their country and in their line of work. The A-Team is the third of the 5 project streams, and what we're looking to do with the A-Team is to deploy teams of what we call accountability ambassadors. These will be experts and partnership building missions that will allow people to train trainers that are on the ground and increase the sustainability of the project. And then the fourth of the project streams is the Data Shift Fund. This is a collectively managed basket fund that will be a rapid response fund that will allow the development of these online platforms, as well as other mechanisms, even all the way down to traditional surveys. And then the fifth and final project stream, which we are looking to launch at the beginning of 2016, would be the Data Shift Dashboard. And this is an online visual presentation of citizen-generated data as it relates to the thematic issues in the post-2015 agenda, as well as official data, big data, and expert analysis of the data. Our goal in the dashboard is to be able to provide a mechanism where citizens, both experts and those who do not have specific expertise in data and visualization, will be able to pull out from the dashboard the information that is important to their advocacy efforts. So ultimately, as I say, it's a very ambitious project, but we are looking, when we look at the course of our 4-month scoping study, what we realized is that the data shift is as much about people as it is about data. And in that, what I mean is that we must have a very intentional focus on resourcing and capacity building in civil society and citizen activists to be able to empower this new and innovative shadow monitoring mechanism. And very short, that is the big development data shift. We have just moved into a 2-year implementation phase, and look forward to input from all those who are online, as well as really engaging partners in this process, because the project is much bigger than Civicus. So it will be a partner-led project as we go forward. In October, the 3rd week of October, we will be gathering strategic partners as well as national campaigners in Nairobi to develop our theory of change and the workflows to go forward as we complete this implementation phase. So certainly welcome any questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, Jason. I see a few people in the private chat have already been suggesting questions, but I'm going to ask people just to hold those questions for the moment. I'm going to try and bring Cecilia's slides onto screen in just a second. I do apologize to Jason as well, because I'm running this off a Mac. Some of the slides haven't always displayed as they were supposed to. But Cecilia, if you are there on the phone, can we just check your audio? I might have to unmute everyone to get that to work. So if everyone could take control of their own muting. Cecilia, do you want to have another go at just speaking?
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you, yes.
Oh, okay, great. Hello, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you are. Yeah, so I am Cecilia Macagnola from Restless Development. We are a youth-led development organization, which means that we lead fairly large-scale development projects on youth-led development. We have a peer-to-peer methodology that we run in 8 different countries, where we support young people to support their peers on issues like livelihood, SRHR, and civic participation. We have just launched, or we're in the process of launching, a new youth-led accountability project called The Big Idea. We're currently in New York as part of the UNGA side event, about to have our roundtable, where we'll be discussing the project in a bit more detail. So this comes at a really timely moment for us. So just to give you a little bit of background about the project and what we've been doing so far, Restless Development has been really heavily involved in the post-2015 process, being a coordinator as the major of the major group on children and young people. And through that mechanism, we've been advocating for the role that young people are going to play in the post-15 process, and trying to influence the mechanisms through which they'll be able to participate. As part of that wider piece of work, we've done a number of consultations. So there was a project where we consulted with more than 30 different countries on young people and the kind of world they wanted to see in the post-2015 framework. And for them, the biggest priority that came out time and time again was an increased focus and participation in governance processes. And as part of this discussion, we were also engaged in the debates ongoing around the use of data and the so-called data revolution. And through these processes and discussions, it emerged that there was a need for young people to be engaging in the post-15 framework, and that with the way that young people are currently using technology, they had a real role to play in this so-called data revolution. So we came up with an idea. Our project is called The Big Idea. And over the last 6 months, we've been developing it with a range of different partners. But it's been a really participatory process, working with young people in our country programs, and also in 3 particular countries, Ghana, Tanzania, and Nepal, to develop a series of pilot projects that would constitute this wider Big Idea program. So just to take you back a little bit, through those consultations and this ongoing engagement with young people that we've had, we kept getting the same responses, that young people and youth organizations were struggling to access data about young people. So a typical example is that most youth organizations in a country like Nepal, for instance, will be getting their data from household surveys, but the household surveys aren't disaggregated by age in a particularly useful way, as in Nepal, age is defined by 16 to 40. And then once they have that data, there are no questions specifically asking about young people or how they live their lives. So the usefulness of that data was a little bit questionable. And then taking it even further, even if you were able to access that data, young people and youth organizations don't have the capacity to work with that data in any kind of meaningful way. So big challenges when thinking about the post-15 framework and how young people are going to participate in it if we don't have concrete information about how young people live their lives or what their pressing concerns are. And we found this across the board. So we start in our research, we came up with, sorry Tim, if we could go to the second slide. Yeah. So we came up with this cycle of disempowerment that we recognized that we recognized was coming through from our different partners, which is that first of all, youth organizations don't have access to good information. And because they don't have that access to that information, they're not able to disseminate it to their members, to their partners. They're not able to share the issues that young people are facing in any kind of useful way. Because they're not able to have these discussions, they also have really limited knowledge of the processes that they could be engaging with if they did have that information, if they were able to advocate with those issues, for those issues. Additionally, young people are then not invited into spaces where they're able to organize, but also where they're able to advocate effectively. And the cycle goes on, and it eventually sort of comes around to policy, young people being disenfranchised, being apathetic and unable to participate legitimately in processes. And in some cases, that leading to them making them easier prey for radicalization, or for engaging in spaces that are less useful and helpful. And then policymakers continuing not to trust them, because underpinning all of this is this real barrier between decision makers and young people, where young people sort of fear and don't understand how decision makers operate, and decision makers are traditionally quite anxious about the role of young people and what they have to offer to these processes. And it goes on and on like this. So with our program, what we've tried to focus on is bringing young people and decision makers together as a key objective of our work. And although we talk about the big idea as an open data project, what we've tried to do is really start with the problems affecting youth organizations and the way that they're using and reflecting their needs, and then thinking about the important role that data has in them trying to do what they're trying to do. So moving forward, through all of these consultations, we went through this participatory process to develop our theory of change and to develop a set of program components that would constitute this wide big idea. And as we were going through that process, we came across a number of different issues about how we would frame this project and how we would approach it as a data project. And the way that we decided to think about this is this project is really about accountability. It's about supporting young people to hold their governments to account effectively, and then trying to think about how we use data so that they're able to do that more effectively. So we've come up with a process where we have 4 different areas of work in order to address these issues that we've identified. And these pieces of work all are going through a pilot phase that starts from October this year and will be running until the end of 2015. So the 4 areas of work, we call them the 4 I's. We call them the 4 I's. The first one is around influence. So it's national level projects that are working with youth organizations to support them on using data effectively, to talk about their issues, to communicate to their members, and to be able to use data collected to do evidence-based advocacy. So young people and youth organizations will be supported and trained to be able to go out and collect data, but also to interpret data coming in from national level surveys and wider statistics, interpret it, present it in ways that are engaging to young people and other youth organizations, and then disseminate that among their stakeholders, understand what their members are feeling about it, and build a case for the kind of issues that they want to take forward. So those are our national level projects, and we put that under the banner of influence. The second area of work is around investment. and supporting existing data and accountability projects that are running. So what we found in our research and our consultations is that there are a lot of youth organizations and startups trying to engage with these issues, and they've had various levels of success. But what they haven't been able to do is streamline their processes and scale up their work so that they can maximize its impact. So we have this investment area of our work where we'll be looking to fund small startups and also youth organizations that are doing this work really well, but strengthening it. And the idea behind that is, if we have this strengthened policy framework through our influencing work, how does that translate into how well young people are able to implement accountability processes? The third area of work is what we call intensify. So this is about using what's happening with data and accountability to really push for young people's issues at regional and global levels. So we have a very similar name from the Civicus Accountability Advocates. Ours are ambassadors, ours are accountability advocates, but have a very different remit. So this is a group of young people we've already been working with through our post-2015 work and as part of a governance and accountability task team. These young people are going to be trained to be able to put together monitoring and accountability framework at a national level, then be able to go home and convene other stakeholders that are working on issues of accountability, but also issues that are most pertinent for young people, and draw them together to build national level monitoring and accountability frameworks for young people in the post-2015 framework. The final area of work is we call Ignite, and this is about drawing all these different pieces of work together to come up with a global monitoring and accountability framework that is youth-led. The idea behind this is to not only build on the different areas of work we've been doing and everything that's happening around data and accountability in young people, but to really try and change the focus from how do we get young people to participate in development, to thinking about young people are already using data and technology in exciting ways. How do we as development actors integrate what they're doing and how they're already living their lives into our development processes to strengthen them and allow young people to participate in a meaningful way. So I've gone over my time there. So just to give you a really quick summary of how we're taking the project forward over the next few years. So this first year is the pilot phase, where all of these areas of work will be launching in different countries in South Asia and Southern Africa. The following stage will be about learning, so generating toolkits and building communities of practice and trying to really understand what worked well in these pilots, what didn't work so well, how can they be strengthened, what needs to be changed and adapted, and really investing the time into that area of learning, because we know that it's an ambitious project, it's going to be a challenging project, and time again with some of these data projects we're finding that there are really key lessons that need not only to be learned but to be reflected in how the project continues to develop. And then after the learning process, or rather parallel, because we see learning as an ongoing process in this project, will be an eventual scale up. So once we feel quite confident in the methodology and in the pilot and in the results from the pilot projects, the aim is to scale these up and be able to do them in more countries than we're starting with. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Celia, for that overview of an ambitious project, but a really important project to bring young people into the debates. So the idea now is that we'll shortly go to some discussion where you can put questions either to our panelists or raise your own thoughts and reflections. We'll have about 15 minutes for this. But first, I'm going to come to Samandro as an initial respondent to share some initial kind of reflections. Samandro did great work preparing for us the reading list and the background work and sort of helping champion this session. And then if we can get audio working, we'll also come to Sherwin, whose recent Open Data in Developing Countries research report looked at the MDGs and how data featured in those. So Samandro, over to you for a few moments.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot, Renette, Jason, and Cecilia, It's how to put it. It's very overwhelming. I do not know if if the feeling is shared by other people listening in as well. Um, as you know, we have been busy with this various, mostly national, and some kind of comparative studies across nations regarding open data policies and various practices around open data and so on. But at the same time, there has been this number of international things in motion. And thanks again for the wonderful summary to begin with of the things happening at the UN level and how that is unfolding. And also this very important two uh, initiatives at the global level to deal with the problem of development data, again at the global level. It's completely overwhelming. And so when you were speaking, Cecilia and Jason, and were giving like small disclaimers that, of course, we understand that it's a large problem and it would have certain difficulties and so on. I mean, really, we understand. I mean, that's really what we're trying to say is that. I mean, it's well understood that at what level of complexity all this has to be designed, has to be planned, and has to be implemented, right? To come back to my notes, there's one question I thought that was completely the key, which is the governance mechanism for this quote-unquote data revolution. And again, the options that were coming out of the discussion so far is that, as you can see in the documents shared by the UN high-level committee, it's largely addressed as data to be used at an international level for monitoring of the goals, right? So clearly, there is that kind of a view: is that the national statistical practices and institutes have to be reformed, revised, so as to ensure that there is at the international scale, there is availability of reliable and comparable data sets. So there's clearly that kind of an outlook on one hand. The national statistical systems, I mean, for obvious reasons, have always remained a national thing, and have, I mean that it has significant, what to say, I mean, the government is significantly invested in using the national statistical systems for its various purposes, and not all citizens have been very comfortable with such usages, right? So there's that level of imagination of who is the primary user that the government is, and the third level, which was quite very represented here, is the citizens. That this international data revolution should be imagining the citizens as the primary users of the data. But as you can see, the way the data is collected to begin with is already always colored by the imagination of the primary user. So that is clearly at the level in which I think the battle needs to be pitched as well, along with the questions of how the data is being managed, how the data is how it is being ensured that the data is interoperable across countries and so on, as well as creating capacities. All those are very important concerns for sure. But then again, just because it wasn't discussed so much, I thought it's also important to think about what kind of international mechanisms can be created to oversee what kind of data is being collected. I think the first presentation mentioned this point about there's a need for a shift from collection of data about citizens to for citizens, and that is a crucial thing, and that is exactly what I'm talking about here. When it comes to data for youth, I think we also should consider the fact that this problem of lack of representation in the data set is something common across various different kind of population groups, including the youth for sure. but it cuts across caste, class, religion in certain countries for sure, and so on. And so the whole question of the citizens are not always a monolithic or a homogeneous category, as so well brought out by this last presentation regarding the youth. I think that's all I have to say.
Wonderful, thank you, Simandro. Some brilliant themes coming out there. I'm going to come to Sherwin next and see if we can get Sherwin's audio working. Sherwin, do you want to try speaking?
Hello, Tim.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hello,
yes.
Tim. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good evening from Manila. Yeah, good evening from Manila, guys. Thank you, Liz, Jason, and Cecilia for those wonderful presentations. Just some reaction. First, let me just frame it in a question. How can we really make data revolution truly revolutionary? In my humble opinion, we can make it truly revolutionary if we can make it inclusive. Coming in from Liz's presentation, she mentioned about closing the data gaps, and she mentioned about the need to monitor the flow of financial resources related to development and some sort of accounting processes. I truly agree with this, but if we're going to measure financial resources given to development projects, people will start asking about impacts and outcomes. And I think this will be the demand now. If we make these data sets available, this will be the demand coming in from countries, especially from NGOs and citizen groups. Yeah, and if we can have this, if we can have data sets that can measure financial flows, outcomes, and impacts, then the reliability question comes in. Liz mentioned about standards, infrastructure, and developing capacities. These are all, I think these are all needed. But may I just add that if we now begin measuring development impacts and outcomes, this makes it political. And, you know, when you make it political, you know, a certain level of complexity comes in. Different governments measure development in different ways. And this might add a layer of complexity in measuring or in the whole data, open data discourse. I was really looking for the term collaboration. I think none of our presenters mentioned this. Cecilia mentioned participation in relation to youth empowerment. Jason mentioned citizen-generated data. Again, the term that, well, I don't know if I'm correct, but correct me if I'm wrong. The term that I kept on hearing was on transparency and accountability. This is just a suggestion coming from, you know, from a developing country perspective, that collaboration can also be injected in the whole discourse of open data. We believe that an engagement process is needed, not only to elicit accountability, but also to encourage more participation. In the Philippines, we have been very adamant with government about creating an engagement mechanism. We're telling them that it's not enough to have data sets available online. You must now validate if these data sets are really needed, and if these data sets are really useful. And we might be missing data sets being created from communities, by citizens. That's why I think that's being done by big development, and yes, youth-led accountability is really great. If placed together with initiatives from the top, And then this can serve as, a potent tool, a potent venue to really harness the potentials of open data. I also would like to again underline context. I think Cecilia mentioned this. It's very important, especially for developing countries, to put into account the need to understand context. There are different political situations, there are different sensibilities, there are even different cultural implications. I think this is the beauty of open data. These layers, these additional layers of complexity makes it more beautiful, makes it more unique, makes it more appealing, at least for me. And I think we have many things to do in order to develop discourse, in order to develop theories on open data and development. Thank
Wonderful.
you, Tim. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sherwin. So our two respondents have given some reflections now. I know we've got a number of people who had questions they've shared in the chat, so I'm going to, with our kind of 5 or 6 minutes left, there's never enough time for these calls, but we're really starting a conversation in each of them. I'm going to call on some of those people who had questions to see if they can ask those in 30 seconds or 60 seconds or so before giving a chance to respondents. So Ricardo, do you want to try unmuting with your question on citizen intelligence?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hello? Yeah. So good morning, everyone. Good night. And my question is, I see that accountability is the main focus over here, but I work here in Rio de Janeiro, and what we do, we give a lot of data to people through our data portal, and then they send some ideas to us how to improve the services, not only on control the corruption, and I think it's really important, but how to use the data to improve what we are doing. Because when governments do wrong, they are not corrupted. They are doing wrong because people don't say that, don't explain how to do that better. And I want to see how the people feel about that. How can we use data to improve services, not only to control the corruption?
It's a really important question there, that this is often framed in terms of monitoring of compliance with goals, but there's much more to data and data revolutions than that. So we'll take a few of these thoughts and questions. Next, I was going to come to Ome. Do you want to share some of your question on the shift? Ome, can you hear us?
Okay, yeah, I can now. Yes.
Please do share your question that you've posed.
Yeah. Okay, hello everyone. I was just listening to the many interesting presentations that we've had, and I was wondering how then the focus could shift in the Sustainable Development Goals from the emphasis on strengthening central statistical processes, which is actually counterproductive to what we desire in terms of opening up data, because that will just make governments give us data in summarized forms. So how then can all this create a change in focus in the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, because it's already in the draft as strengthening central statistical capacity? So that was my question. Hi, Tim. That was my question.
Hello, sorry, I was muted and was about to relay Gisele's question, which was the issue that there's no average citizen or government official. How do we see the heterogeneity inside categories and deal with them? And importantly, how do we build trust on top of data? So if we don't see responsiveness to the demands raised in initiatives, they might not have people's adherence. So there's 3 issues have been put on the table then, I think, which I'm going to come to our panelists to briefly respond to before we hit the top of the hour. The first was Ricardo's question about using data to improve services as well as hold to account. Ome's question on statistical capacity and is that counterproductive to opening up? And Giselle's questions about seeing inside categories and building trust. Liz, do you want to just give some kind of closing reflections to those or other things you've heard?
Yes, thanks for that, Tim. In response to Ricardo's question, I think it's really important, and we've looked at this from the sort of development effectiveness perspective in our work around making aid flows more transparent. And to some extent, it comes back to what Ome said before about what happens when you start putting out information about results and impact. And this will, yes, it will become political, but I would say that's what it's all about. Once you start having that information out there, people are going to look at the results, and it's for civil society organizations, different stakeholders, to be able to analyze that and be able to feed back into the process about how to improve. Maybe it's service provision, maybe it's a policy, a priority for a government, but only by having that information being made available can you start having that discourse. Just to come back to, was it Giselle's, the lady who talked about shifting from this sort of centralized statistical process to an open data approach? Absolutely, we have to work towards achieving that. And I think what I hope to try and put out there for the group is the fact that there is a very real opportunity to influence this process. There isn't a lot of clarity out there at the moment, but there is a wealth of experience, even just within this, and expertise, even just within this group, and also looking at the initiatives that others are doing, such as Restless Development, where we can actually look to feed into this panel of experts. And coming back to the governments, it can't just be about experts sitting around a table. We need to get the community and at different levels, national level, international level, working together to try and influence this process. So I think there is an opportunity. We can change this, but we just need to get better at working together to do it.
Wonderful. And Jason, do you want to give any responses to what you've heard? You're currently muted.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the responses and questions. I think they're very important and complex questions. And just to briefly synthesize, I believe that Sherwin pointed out that for the data revolution to be truly revolutionary, it must be inclusive. And collaboration is certainly at the core of the data shift. And when we look at how to improve governance, how to strengthen central statistical capacity and improve responsiveness and building trust, I would bring that back to citizen action and citizen involvement in all of the processes, from both producing and using data. So recently we released a State of Civil Society report that pointed out a double democratic deficit. And what we mean by that is that citizens are faced with a deficit of democracy, both at their local, national, and international level. So I think that for me, the answer to all of these very complex questions is citizen engagement and inclusiveness. And I do believe that that holds the key to make it both more responsiveness, to improve the governance, and as well to strengthen central statistical capacity, because once those national statistical organizations understand what is important to citizens, the hope is, and obviously the dream is, that that would feed into what is important for their measurements as well.
Thank you, Jason. I think that's a really nice summing of some of the key issues there. Cecilia, unfortunately, I think has had to leave us because she, as she mentioned, is there at the UN meetings this week and is straight on to other discussions, but hopefully able to take some of the discussion with her into those conversations. As we're hitting the hour, I'm going to sort of wrap up our recorded formal session, but as there's so many interesting people here, I will leave the call open afterwards. But in closing, and letting people, if you have other things to go to do that, I just want to mention a few things coming up in the work of the Open Data Research Network. We're going to be carrying on conversations on these themes and others at the Open Development Camp that's coming up in Amsterdam, particularly talking about the topic of open data capacity building. Hopefully some of that will be webcast, and if you are attending that, we'd love to kind of engage there. A number of partners will be at the ICE government conference in Portugal, hosting a workshop on open data intermediaries and the importance of thinking about how intermediaries play a role in this picture at the end of October. And if anyone is in or around London, the Web Foundation are hosting with the South Bank Centre a Web We Want festival, part of which again is talking about the importance of an open free web as a platform for sharing data. So to round off the recorded session, I want to thank our speakers and everyone who's responded, and we'll be writing up a summary of this discussion and sharing that with all of you as a collaborative document you can contribute to. So thank you.